got tight hamstrings. How do I stretch my tight hamstrings? Great question. Not going to answer that question right away. So what we're going to figure out first is where are your hamstrings in regards to neutral? Because if we're going to stretch a hamstring, we better realize where that thing is, because it could be not at all short and tight. It could be long and tight. And stretching one of those will be effective, the other will not. Commonly we see people walking around what we call an anterior pelvic tilt. There's a bunch of other names for this. I'm going to save you those, and we just call it anterior pelvic tilt. This is where the pelvis is rotated forward. Could be from footwear, any number of reasons why this is happening. Those are tight hamstrings. These hamstrings are tight because they're pulled into a long position at a neutral stance. They're not truly neutral. Short tight hamstrings present in a very different way, and that's this posterior tilt. That's when the actual pelvis is rotated posteriorly. These hamstrings can be darn tight, and those are tight short. These hamstrings, really effective to stretch these. These hamstrings, not so effective to stretch the heck out of the hamstrings. They're already pulled into a long position. So how do we deal with this if this is what's happening to us? If we were of the 90% of people walking around in anterior pelvic tilt, how do we address this? How do we identify it? We're going to use two simple methods. One is the active straight leg test. Everybody should know how to do this. If you don't, I'll teach you right now. You're going to use a wall, which I don't necessarily have here, a nice flat wall or a corner, because we want to test and retest. We're not going to talk about pelvic position first. We'll talk about it second. You're going to lie flat on your back. That's pretty straightforward and simple. You'll put your feet together. You'll be using a wall next to you ideally, and you'll pick a leg to go. The leg that's traveling is going to travel straight with the knee straight without any deviation from the foot or bend in the knee until it reaches its end length. When we get to the end, we'll know we're at the end. It feels tight, and what's going to start to happen is that lower leg is going to want to bend, and you're going to want to move your torso around. That's far enough. If we get any movement in the downhill leg, that's about as far as we're going to go. If we get bend in the uphill leg, that's as far as we're going to go. And you'll go for 3 of these. And you can either have a friend mark yourself on the wall, or you can go ahead and just take a peek at it somehow to measure where you are. You'll do it on the left side, you'll do it on the right side. You'll see where you're at. You'll then find a flat wall and a chair, some kind of platform. If you have a bench, great. If you don't, find a chair. And you want to achieve this 90-90 position. I'll explain what I mean by that. 90 degrees to the knee, 90 degrees to the hip. Once again, nice flat back. We're going to get ourselves in a squat kind of pattern where we have our feet roughly shoulder width apart. The knee is going to be stacked directly over the foot and the hip directly below the knee. At this point, I'm going to push into the wall 2% of my strength, preferably barefoot so I can feel my heel, the whole outside of my foot, my big toe, and some of the ball of my foot grabbing that wall. So a full foot contact on the wall, pressing into the wall lightly. At this point, I'm going to add not just a downward force into the wall, but a downward hook, if you will, with my heels into this platform, whether it's a chair or a bench. At this point, when I'm starting to drive down into that bench with my heels, my pelvis is going to want to lift up. This is when you're going to be aware of where your pelvis is in space. If you have a super flat back, you're already going to have, if you have short hamstrings, you're already going to have a pelvis that's up off the ground a little bit. And you're going to know all about that. You're going to be like, wow, I'm already kind of in a bridge. Here it is. I can almost get my hand underneath that thing. If you're like the rest of us, you're going to feel a big lower dotted curve, or some element of lower dotted curve, and your pelvis is going to feel some tension as you push those heels into the bench, and you'll feel your pelvis coming to a flat position and almost initiating a bridge, which is what you're going to look to do. At the point of initiating the bridge, you're just going to pick your pelvis up off the ground enough, just the lower portion here from my belt line down, lifting off the ground enough for me to slide a piece of paper under it. Not a huge bridge, just a slight initiation of a bridge, while maintaining flat feet into the wall, heel drive into that platform, knees over feet in a 90-90 position. Once I've engaged all of this, I'm going to breathe for 5 cycles, whatever that looks like for you. Nice slow breaths, normal breaths. We can coach the breath another time. This same pattern is really good for some other neurological stuff. It's separate. Right here, we're going to keep it simple. 5 breaths. After your 5th breath, you'll relax and disengage all these muscles. Wiggle your hips a little bit. Go back and retest your active straight leg test. If you were one of those people, the few, that when they sit up in this position, they feel that they're already in that bridge with really short hamstrings, short and tight, you're not going to see a huge difference here in your retest. If you're one of the many that have that anterior pelvic tilt and you've neutralized your pelvis for those 5 breaths, engaging your proximal hamstring, we'll talk about the mechanics of this later if there's an interest, you're going to see quite the difference in your active straight leg test without stretching your hamstrings. You actually engaged your hamstrings to affect that end range, not stretch them. We can go into great detail on this if you guys are interested in it, but if you try that simple at-home test, give us some feedback, tell us what you think. We affect a lot of change with this simple one in the office all the time.